Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Loading Screen, a podcast about games, game development, and my game dev journey. This is episode 6 of this podcast. If we haven't met, my name is Aaron. I run Eventide Game Studios. I've been a hobby solo game dev for about 4 years now, and I have one game on Steam called The Bridge, and it's a Sokoban style puzzle game. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about prioritizing game dev. Then we'll go into some podcast highlights, some personal updates, games I've been playing, and a game dev update. So let's hop into our talking point for today, prioritizing game dev. So I want to point out before I begin that these are my thoughts on how I go about game development. This is not an end-all, be-all, or a single way to do it. It's just the way I go about it. Your situation is going to vary. So let's talk about prioritizing game dev. First, we need to understand the problem. The problem is that lots of things are fighting for our attention, our effort, and our time. You have your job or your work, your career that takes up a good chunk of your time. Then you have entertainment. This could be games, movies, books, concerts, social media, travel, hobbies, or simply just relaxing. Then you have people. You have your family and friends you want to hang out with. You have your health to worry about. What foods are you eating? Are you working out? Then you have money. There's probably some level of budgeting or investing going on, or hopefully you're looking into that. And then there's just general lifestyle things like chores and just maintaining yourself. So when I hear people that want to get into game dev, I think, okay, cool. However, besides knowing where to start, usually the other issue that pops up is with time. And among all of these problems that we just talked about, it's going to sound difficult to add another item into the mix of all that. So they wait until they can find the time to do it. And to be blunt, this basically means if and when I have time to get to it, and when I'm feeling like it, I will do it. But for now, all the other stuff and the things I've been doing in my life are more important than this new thing that I'm starting to learn. In this case, it's game development. And whether that be good or bad for me, I'm just going to keep doing them. And I'm not saying that you should prioritize game dev instead of helping your family or like eating or something. No, not doing that. I'm just saying it comes down that you have to make time for it. And that happens through prioritization. Your situation is going to vary. However, there are going to be things that are going to be non-negotiable, and those should be treated as the highest priority, like taking care of your family, taking care of yourself, eating, drinking water, chores, that kind of a thing. So you need to do those. You should know how much time that takes up, whether it be like every week or every month. If you don't know, that's a good experiment in self-reflection to know where you are actually spending your time. So once you've done that, in theory, you should have some time left over. And I want to say congrats. You actually have found the time that you've been looking for. So now you need to prioritize this precious time that you need to prioritize and make the time to do what you want to do. And here's a not so surprising secret. You have the power to control how you spend your time, where you spend your time, who you spend it with, and how much effort you put in. Don't underestimate the value of this. So how do you prioritize and schedule time? Well, here's a little tip I'm going to give you. Schedule and prioritize your time on a calendar, not on a to-do list. To me, to-dos have a prioritization to them in the sense that you have things at the top of the list that you're going to do first, and then as you go down it, you're just going to execute those. However, there's still a prioritization there. But it also has a if I get to it vibe to it still. So one thing I've learned or tried to do is put it on a calendar. And by putting it on a calendar, one, I'm actually making time for it, but it also time bounds it and gives it a deadline because I'm basically saying I only have a limited time to do this one thing, game dev. I'm giving myself permission to do game dev. And this also means that I'm saying I'm giving all the remaining time I have for the day to do all the other things I want to do. I'm not excluding those, but I'm just saying I'm going to prioritize this specific time slot for game dev. And this is how I've gotten in the habit of building time for game dev in my experience. So saying you're going to do game dev, for instance, like say every night for 30 minutes at like 9 o'clock, like that's going to have an insane amount of value compared to, oh, it's on my to-do list. If I get to it, I get to it. And then you end up doing this long trailing, just waiting, trying to find time. And to me, it's actually motivating to know that I am going to do game dev at that specific time, just say like 9 o'clock in my example. And you can roughly plan this out. And I think it's a good experiment. It doesn't need to be like a minute to minute. I would say not do that. No one can really plan out their day minute to minute. I think the cool thing though is that you can actually do this with anything. But I just decided this is how I'm going to do it with game dev. You might say, cool. However, what do I do with all the stuff you want to do that you don't have time for? So you're filling out your calendar and your schedule and you realize, oh, hey, I don't have time to do, an XYZ. Like I don't have time to work out, or I don't have time to maybe like read a book. I think this is where importance and sacrifice comes into play. For importance, if you weren't able to fit it in to that time or your calendar, whether it be like a week or a month, it begs the question of, was it really that important? Like what purpose does it actually serve? And this more aligns with what your values are. And that I think is something you need to self-reflect on. With sacrifice, prioritization is not a perfect method. You will have to give up things that you like to do to pursue other things that you want to do or love to do. I would love to tell you that you could do it all, but it's just not the case. Whether you want to spend time learning or growing in game dev or doing something else, or worst case, doing something you don't want to do, like doom scrolling on your phone, for instance, like it's up to you. I remember reading a quote from an email from Alex Van Drome, and he says, "You have the potential to achieve anything, but not everything." And I remember that, and I remember how powerful that was. So I guess I want to reiterate that this is why your time is so precious. It's because you only have a limited amount of it. So spend it how you want to. To recap, don't wait to find time for game dev. Make time for it. You do this by prioritizing, understand the non-negotiables and most important parts of your life and how long they take. Obviously prioritize those. With the remaining time, prioritize and plan it out how you wish. I recommend using a calendar versus a to-do list to give it a time bound and a deadline. Understand that this method isn't perfect though. It will require you to evaluate what is actually important to you and understand that you may need to make sacrifices to make game dev possible. However, at the end of the day, you are limited on time, so make the best out of it. That's my main topic for today. Let's go into some podcast highlights. So we've been doing the podcast for about 6 weeks now, which is, I think, awesome. I'm finally in the groove, I feel like, of doing the podcast. As far as YouTube goes, we did get one more subscriber. So I think that's really exciting that it's slowly growing. We have 5 subscribers now, which is like, it's crazy. It's fun to think about. And I'm also understanding the power and the reach of YouTube because on the analytics side, it's absolutely insane. So we have 5 episodes out so far, and we have 12,000 impressions since restarting the podcast, which is less than a month. And to be clear, an impression is really just someone who sees your thumbnail or it being suggested to you by YouTube. So to give you a breakdown of the impressions per episode. So episode 00, which is my introduction of why I want to restart it, that had 26 impressions. The first one had 36. The second one had 119. So you can see that almost, tripled. But then episode 3 came around and it had 3.5 thousand impressions, which is wild. Then episode 4 had 5.5 thousand, which is almost double the previous week. And when episode 5, it went back down to 3.7K, which is it's just mind boggling to understand that the podcast at this point has reached 12,000 people, whether 12,000 people have seen it, not necessarily clicked on it. Right now we're about 94 views. So the click rate, I think it's the click view rate is not quite there yet, but I think it's still very special that YouTube is doing its best to get the podcast out to people. I'm just going to keep at it. So that's the YouTube side. As far as the Libsyn side, which is the podcast hosts I have, the numbers are, I'll say, not as great. So far, it says I only have 2 downloads, and that's all the analytics I have for it. And this is primarily because of the price plan I picked, is I didn't pay for the analytics for it. However, I'm questioning moving the podcast to a different hosting because of all the analytics I've got from YouTube and how much I can maybe get data and make decisions off of that. Unfortunately, it's, I think, all I can afford right now. So I'm going to consider that more in the future. For personal updates, I would say there's no big personal updates this week. It's mainly been probably about my wrist. I had a video call with a physical therapist. They gave me some PT exercises. They also gave me some recommendations for some straps. And so far, they work pretty well with mitigating my wrist issues. And so I've just been doing that. And that's been a lot of fun. Then going into games I've been playing. And this I'm excited to talk about. I've only played one game, and it's Tunic. And I did beat it finally. So I'm very happy about that. And I want to say I wanted to talk about it, but I'm not going to talk about it in any way that contains any spoilers. So spoiler free. Overall, absolutely wonderful game. And I recommend anyone to play it if they like, I'll say 3D or adventure action game. It's such a great game. I did get stuck on one part about probably halfway through, probably like 2/3 maybe even, of you need to look for a specific item in the game. I didn't know where it was, so I spent probably about 3 hours looking for this and just looking at the maps and trying to understand maybe there was something I haven't searched, or there's one little quirk because the level design is so good and so elaborate that maybe there was just something I missed. And I remembered Thor of Pirate Software, which if you haven't heard of Thor and Pirate Software before, like I highly recommend checking almost any or all of his content. His YouTube shorts are great. His YouTube is great. Anyway, but I remember he played the game all the way through. His playthrough was about 15 hours. So I essentially just sped through to the point where I was stuck and see what he did to get himself, quote, unstuck. I was about half a room away from getting myself unstuck. And the difference was that instead of pushing through to the end of the room, I thought instead I would reevaluate to maybe there was something I missed, and ended up just not being the right call. I needed to push through it, and I got the item. So once I saw him do that, I immediately stopped watching, did what he did, and then I went on and eventually went to beat the game. Before I talk about the, I'll say, positive sides, there were a few pain points, kind of feeding back from our episode of last week, that I had with the game. And the main pain points were, one, of that point of getting stuck. I felt it was a bit too much to ask the player. It felt too wrong to have the player push forward into that space, that it definitely did not feel like I was equipped properly for it. So take that for what you wish. The other big pain point I had was the boss battles. And these are very fun moments in the game, in the sense that they feel very rewarding, but the difficulty at which they are asking and you play against the boss at is so high that I almost wanted to rage quit about every single boss there was in the game because they just felt so difficult at the time. And I'm going to talk about a big learning lesson I had after that. So the boss battles are very, very difficult in the game. But whether that was expected or not, I don't know. However, it does give you a nice, rewarding feeling, similar to I think how a Dark Souls boss would be, which we'll talk about that later too. So about the positives of the game. Like I said, the game is absolutely brilliant in so many ways. It has so much mystery, and there's so many secrets in the game that just make it such a good experience. Mechanically, the game is very simple, which I think is good because it will apply to definitely a wider audience, but it also does a lot with a little, which to me is a good sign of good design. If you're able to reuse lots of aspects and use it in many different ways to still make it interesting. The level design, puzzle design, and the world building are some of the best I've seen, at least as far as an indie game goes. So if you're interested in any of those, look at Tunic, or consider looking at Tunic and try to understand what is going on there. It gave me feelings of awe, wonder, and discovery throughout the entire game. And I think I finished the game probably in about 15 hours. It probably was really 12 hours if we take out the part I was stuck at. But if I could encapsulate all of those feelings and honestly just sell it, that would be great. Or really to figure out what gave me those feelings and put that into my own game or into a similar style game, or somehow know how to decouple that and take out different parts of that and put that into a game, would be just phenomenal. So as far as the progression of the game goes, like I said, I finished it. As far as game specific progression goes, I finished it without completing the manual. And the manual is, I think, it is an essential part throughout the entire game, so it's not a spoiler. However, I learned that I was actually very close to finishing the manual. I did some personal secrets hunting, and I eventually just watched some guides about how to finish the last parts of it. I was able to finish the manual. I did not 100% it, and I probably won't go back to 100% it if I'm being honest. I'd rather probably go play more games, but at that point when I look up a guide, it's really just going through the motions, and I'm not going through that discovery and the wonder and the awe, which I still get that while actually uncovering the puzzle itself, but it doesn't have quite the same impact or feel because I'm simply just looking up a guide, and it's really just a means to an end. So some of the secrets I did not think about because I did look at some of the guides, and some of them I just did not understand what they were trying to connect to in terms of what they were referring to. In hindsight, it was actually very easy to correlate them, but others weren't, which is, I think, part of my issue is I just didn't recognize the pattern of what they were referring to. I did have another big learning lesson, and that's the get good So get good is usually associated with Dark Souls, part of the meme. And the reason I think I relate to this in Tunic is because going back to the boss battles, I learned more about, I think, probably myself. I was trying to beat the enemy and the bosses how I wanted to beat them and not how they are intended to be beaten. So what does that mean? So I would essentially go into a battle like I were just a regular enemy of like, I'm going to win regardless. And I'm going to do really whatever I want. Sure, I might get hit maybe a couple times, and then I move on. And when I would do that, I would die really quickly. And I was getting so frustrated that I couldn't beat it the way I wanted to, and not the way it was intended. And what that means is like I really wasn't taking the patience and slowing down to really learn the enemy. When opportunities came up, I didn't see it satisfactory, to be honest, to maybe like take a single hit, give a single hit, like hit the enemy or hit the boss, versus doing like a full combo. Like if I couldn't do a full combo, like I would consider it a wasted opportunity. Like I wouldn't even do it. So I'm not taking the little hits and the little wins throughout the boss battle. And I didn't take advantage of the opportunities that were presented because I had this sort of mental block that like it was this all or nothing thing instead of doing more or less like a chip damage in it. It ended up being much more of like a tactical experience of finding those small windows of time to do damage, rather than trying to look for these large windows all the time, because like boss battles have AI. However, their patterns of when they do those, like certain attacks and certain things, vary. So you saying I'm going to get this easy attack versus a hard attack consistently is not going to align with your vision. Like you need to learn to just like take the opportunities. And when I learned that, and honestly a big part of it was remaining calm too, I realized I can take on like any boss battle at that point. It was really just me executing that. It was not like me trying to get lucky with like making sure that the boss did these sets of attacks first so I could win. I really actually felt super confident by the end of the game that I could really beat any boss because I've essentially learned the skill to be patient and learn what their movesets are and how to apply it, and taking the opportunities that they were given to me rather than looking for the opportunities I always wanted in terms of like those single hits versus doing the combos. I think that's a very, profound idea, which obviously sounds really simple, but like while you're playing it and you're dying round after round, like your patience starts to wear pretty thin. Take that for what you wish. I think that was a very valuable experience that I think I'm definitely going to take into other games, of whether, I'm dying a lot in another boss, or, playing Dark Souls, or I've thought about playing Elden Ring too. And I think that obviously closely aligns with the experience that Elden Ring provides, or any Souls-like really. Going on to some game dev updates. There's two updates. One, I was playing around with the art and learning shaders in Godot. I have a general idea of how I want the cards to look for like enhancements and like what Balatro calls additions. And really I was just playing around with them, trying to understand whatever this GD shader language is. I had done a little bit with shaders before, and it is actually quite fun, and they make it very easy and approachable to do. So I have like certain effects that I want to accomplish. And so I started just simply doing them like you have the card, then how do I want to alter the card? So you essentially I kind of mask it based on color. So if you have like a playing card, like say an ace of spades, the face of the card, like the background white part, to be black. And I want the glyphs, so like the A, the center spade, or the upper left or upper right spade, to be white. You can simply just invert the color. And you can do that with math, which is super powerful. And that's kind of the basics of shaders to, I guess, a basic concept of shaders. So I was just playing around with this, and I was learning a lot about readability, because one of the ideas I had was for this pearl edition, in the sense that I have the face be like this shiny pearl color with like a slight iridescence, and then I have the actual glyphs, so the ace, like a spade, and all those things that actually make the pictures on the card be like this rainbowy color himself, and it would kind of move and it would look really cool. And to just convey the idea, I just gave the face a simple color, and then I implemented a simple rainbow shader with just a gradient I found and some noise, just multiplied them together, and it would appear in the glyphs. And I realized how unreadable it was, and I had not even considered readability in any of these ideas or these concepts. Because if you're looking at a card and you don't see what it is, that's a pretty big deal. Of it's not readable in the sense I don't even know what card it is. I couldn't even tell it was an ace, or I couldn't even tell it was a spade. And that's the other thing with playing cards, is that you have red and you have black. So if I gave it the same shader as a heart, let's say, I couldn't tell the difference. Another idea I had was this idea of like a midnight card. So it's like a dark face card with gold glyphs, and same idea. Like, yes, the face is the same if it's black, but since I'm changing the glyphs, usually you can identify whether it is like a heart or a diamond because it's red versus a spade or a club because that's black. And when I did the shader, like, it made sense all code wise. Like, I was able to get it to work. However, when I looked at it, I was like, I can't tell what this card is off of the bat. Like, if I had a hand of them, it'd be very hard to be able to sort through them. So that was a big learning lesson just about readability. And this kind of relates to Balatro a little bit because I was wondering about some of the constraints Balatro had, in the sense that Balatro has this idea of the negative card, where it basically adds one slot size. And at first I thought that was a weird constraint to not give playing cards that. However, then I thought about it more. And I realized that the reason why he doesn't do that, I think, is not because it's like a gameplay specific, like you can't do it. Like, functionally, I feel like it should work, that you could add a negative card to your hand. However, there's other things that can happen to cards that you can't do with other cards. So you can add negatives and things to jokers. However, you can't enhance a joker, whereas you can enhance a playing card. So knowing that, and if you say you try to apply this negative effect, which is like this cool like inversion effect of it basically turns, white to black, black to white. And it happens with all the colors too, which is really cool, is that it becomes, I think, unreadable, which is the reason why he doesn't do it. And this also brings up the idea of he has high contrast cards too. So high contrast cards, so it turns just like a club, the suit's, I think, blue. However, if you're doing this with a negative card, that blue would get inverted. So now that you have this blue that's a high contrast and you have this other color that's a high contrast. So now instead of knowing what color 4 cards need to be in high contrast, you need to know what 8, and it becomes this state specific thing. Then on top of that, you have like the enhancements, which are like a visual, I'll say scanner. It's basically like a sprite mask on top of the card. And it's easily to know of like, okay, this one enhances it. This one's a gold card. This one is a steel card. And they all have their own visual effect to them. But however, if you negative that, which means their colors are inverted, it becomes this new card that has like this different color. So now you need to know what it looks like when it's gold and what it looks like it's inverted gold. So it adds just like this whole layer of complexity to it. So really, adding additions and shaders to the playing cards is not a limitation of the game design. It's a limitation of the art. Being able to convey ideas simply. And really, that's all what art is trying to just convey evidence and information to you in a quick and easy manner rather than actually writing it all out. So that was something I thought was really interesting as I was going through this experiment with shaders and designing my own cards. I did add another type of card, a consumable card. One could think of it as like a tarot card in Balatro, but I'm calling it a talent card. I think the name just happens to be similar, but it's really that it does one thing very specifically. And a few reasons why I was really slow to add this. One was because I was really concerned with the naming. Because once I put a name to it, like the name is going to go into the code and the code is just going to grow. So if I change the name later, it's not going to have the same impact, which is a very nuanced little thing that I'm worried about, but it does have a big effect on sort of the code base and what I'm working with. So I was really hesitant for that. The second thing was with like the system interaction, because when you play these cards, it's going to essentially alter other cards. So it's going to add enhancements to them. So if I want to change a spade to a heart or anything like that, I want to destroy a card, I want to enhance a card, it has a certain interaction. So that interaction requires lots of different systems to work together. So that was my hesitancy. And eventually I'm just going to do this. It was so much easier than I was expecting it to be. And I'm just kind of bummed that I didn't do it earlier. However, I guess I'm still learning that lesson now. So just like do the hard things or do the things you're avoiding, because in all honesty, it's really not that hard to do them. Furthermore, it's going to be super satisfying to complete them. Because of that, I've added this new card type, which is the consumable card called Talent. I have 5 of them so far in the game. I'm using a similar system to import basically all the data from a separate file. And then I build the cards actually at runtime. And so I have 5 different cards. They basically just change the suits. So I have 4 for changing the suits and 1 to destroy a card. So very simple right now. They're definitely going to be more elaborate there's like no limitations on them right now, in the sense that I could change any card, any quantity of cards, which I think I do want to limit it to a certain degree. Obviously, destroying a card, like that's an insanely powerful ability. So I don't want to be able to just destroy any card. I want to destroy specific cards too. Really constrain the system a bit more so that I could manage the game design and the gameplay and ultimately the experience. That's my game dev update for this week and the end of the podcast. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you want to hear more about the latest news we have, feel free to join our email list. We'll love to hear from you. If you want to continue the conversation about prioritization, or maybe you have a game dev update you have, hop into our Discord, where you can meet more gamers and game devs. Check out Abridged 2 on Steam. Any links to things I mentioned in the show today, I'm going to put in the show notes. So I just want to say thank you again, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.